Hi there. I've called this talk 7 Ways to Find the Joy in Stories, because I think that if you want to write, it's a really good place to start. And I wanted to talk a little bit about stories. So one thing is, do you know that humans really are story machines? Early humans actually survived by the fact that they told stories to each other. Stories are entertainment, sure, stories have always been entertainment, but stories actually, even today, stories have another function. Stories are brilliant ways of sharing information, and also stories are great ways of sharing information in ways that makes people remember it. So early humans, they probably told stories to let people know where the bears were living, or maybe where the best berries would come in the autumn. So all of these things were coded in stories. Stories have been around a long time, not just before films and television, but before the printed book was even invented. Entertainment has of telling stories. You can imagine people sitting around a campfire, everyone listening in, and I think actually that way of telling stories, to have someone telling a story and everyone sharing in it, is brilliant. And I think more people should read aloud and share stories today. I think it's reading individually kind of is much more of a modern way of enjoying stories. But basically, stories aren't just fun, they're actually really important to us as human beings, because they entertain us and they teach us things. So I think that's my first tip, is to understand why stories are important. Important information is encoded in stories, and today we all know we're not really looking to stories to tell us where to avoid a particular cave because there may be a bear lurking there. But we still read stories to find out maybe how we to behave towards people, things that maybe we can expect in the future ahead, maybe how to spot people who are being a bit deceptive. There are lots of things that we really do learn from stories, how some people might mean us harm and how to defend ourselves against that. And I think that stories are very important. So I'm guessing that if you want to write and you're watching this, that perhaps you already like reading stories. And I would like to say that that's how I started to want to write. Was it all started for enjoying stories. I really wanted to be a storyteller. I love books, I love stories, I love to read, and I think I started to really admire people who could write those stories that I particularly really loved. And I would say that some stories just give me a feeling where I get to the end and I am there thinking, that was brilliant, I enjoyed that so much. Of course, there are other stories I read, and perhaps I don't like them quite so much. But what I kind of wanted to do was to try to find a way that I could write and give people that sort of joy that I get from stories. And I knew that the stories that I really liked the best, were definitely the ones where the writer could surprise me, even though I like to think I'm a careful reader and I couldn't always spot what was going on. And that's what I really liked. Those are the stories I really loved. And I just thought I would love to be able to write something like that. And maybe to get someone who likes reading the same things as me, to get that joy out of reading something that I had written. That was my inspiration. A lot of my inspiration comes from reading. So my next tip, I think, is that you need to read and find that joy. If you haven't yet found that joy and know what stories you like, read some more, read some different stories and find that joy. I also think if you want to be a writer, you can learn so much from reading. And I would say that you need to start thinking perhaps a little bit more about what you're reading. Like I said, I knew that the stories I like were ones where the writer could surprise me. Start to think about what you particularly like. Maybe start with the stories that you don't particularly like that much. Maybe stories that your friends have loved and you don't like so much. Think about why you didn't like them so much, why they don't appeal to you. It doesn't mean that writer's done a bad job because your friend loved that story. But why didn't it appeal to you? What is it that you really look for in a story? And I think that's the way that it should be. Everyone should be different. Not everyone is going to love the same stories. But I think if you want to be a writer, this is my next tip. Try to focus in on the stories that you really like, because my advice is try to start off with writing those types of stories that you love to read. I think that you probably start to have a few good ideas for stories, which are probably going to be along the lines of the sort of stories that you like to read. And I think that if you like to read and you start to know the sort of stories that you like, you're actually already on a road to becoming a storyteller. So let's just go back to that campfire. Imagine that someone is there listening, a particular person, someone a bit like you who wants to become a storyteller. They might go home and perhaps their children are at home and they tell that story to their children, but they might change it just a little bit. They might know that their children are going to like if they add a bit that will make them laugh a bit more. You might change the ending so it's a bit less scary. All storytellers are good at taking what they know and what they enjoy and just making it grow and making it change and making it change in a different direction. That's all good. So if you think about the characters that you like, think specifically about the sort of characters. How much action, how much mystery do you like? Historical stories. What do you really like? How quickly does the plot move in the stories that you like the best? And I think that sometimes people like something funny, something sad, but that's a really good starting place for being a storyteller. So I would say my next tip is that when you start to write, try to write something that looks quite similar to what you like to read. Challenge yourself maybe to think, can I do this better? Can I do it differently? But if you've enjoyed it, there's much more chance that you're going to write from the heart and write something that you really enjoy. And I think for that reason, I always feel that reading gives me a big well of creativity I can dip into any time. So, reading lots is definitely one of my big tips. And I know sometimes if I say to people, oh, I get loads of ideas when I read, people sometimes give me a look as if to say, well, isn't that cheating a bit? You're just taking somebody else's ideas. As if to be a proper writer, you have to sit somehow in a darkened room and staring at a blank screen and come up with something totally from nowhere. But I do not believe anybody's imagination works like that. You need to kind of fuel your imagination with lots of ideas, and we all build on stories that we know. We all have absorbed lots of stories, whether it's been reading, what people things of people have happened today, films that you've seen. All those stories are in your head, and when you start to write, it will definitely affect what you write. If I get stuck at any time, I could often go off and just read. I feel that reading what other people have done and having that appreciation of how much you can really enjoy what they've written, it's like having a bit of a creative dip going to have a read. And I think that as you read more and you write more, you do start to evolve the stories which are unique to you, which is what you want to do, but that's not going to happen all at once. I like mystery stories, so I write mystery stories, but really the fact that I write mystery stories only comes from the fact that I've read lots of them. Some I like better than others, but I do love them. I knew I wanted to write mysteries, and I knew that I wanted I didn't want to just copy all those other mystery writers. I wanted to do something that was a little bit fresh, a little bit different, that brought my unique perspective to mystery stories. So I think of myself as being next in a big line of mystery story writers who have written all those brilliant stories that have fired up my imagination and given me the urge to try and write something myself. You'll never run out of books to read, and for me that means you never run out of material that gives you creative inspiration. And I think if ever you're stuck, just read, remind yourself of why you love stories, which stories that you in particular you really like. See if you can identify how particular stories make you feel. So I'm going to leave you with my final tip, which is to remind you to always find the joy in stories.